Have you ever lost your cool with your kids, vowed you'd never do that again, only to find yourself yelling at them an hour later or a few days later? Yeah, that's happened to me too. How about this? Have you ever found yourself lying awake at night wondering if you're doing the right thing or if you made the right decision for your child or if you just totally screwed up their life? Sounds like me too. Well, I want you to know you are not alone. This is what happens to all good parents. But as a child psychiatrist and mother of two, it's my goal as the parent doctor to help you find some useful answers about how you can prevent these things from happening and have each day be better than the last. After all, we all are striving to have a trusting, connected relationship with our kids, and we all want to launch kids who are ready to be adults in this great big world. Parenting is not just about raising successful kids, it's about raising ourselves, mastering our own emotion regulation, breaking cycles, and creating a home and life filled with love, resilience, and connection. If this resonates with you, please join me in the Empowered Parent Club. Follow, rate, and share this podcast with anyone that you know who would benefit from it. Let's get started. Hello, and welcome back to the Parent Doctor Podcast. I am Dr. Marissa Caudill, and it's been a while since I recorded an episode that was just me chatting, but this is an episode I've been wanting to record for quite some time. I am going to tell you all a story, and it's an important story because it really relates to my sense of myself, my spiritual sense of myself, and what is driving me in my work as the parent doctor. So the story is about my father, and I guess I'll start at the beginning of his life. He was born in 1953 to his mother and father, who hadn't been married very long before she got pregnant. And when he was 3 years old, they moved from Bermuda, where they had met, to San Antonio, Texas. And shortly after that, the marriage began to fail. I don't know much about it, but I know that my grandmother told me her husband sold the family car for a motorcycle. I think he had some problems with drinking and gambling. And she decided that she needed to get a divorce. And she called her parents in New Hampshire, and they drove from New Hampshire to San Antonio in the summer. And my paternal great-grandfather took my father to live with him in New Hampshire at age 3. Now, in 1956, when this happened, I can only imagine that my paternal great-grandfather and my grandmother probably didn't have, I know they didn't have the awareness that we now have about all that kids do understand and can understand and the ways that we can talk to them to help them make sense of traumatic events. So you can imagine that for my 3-year-old father to be taken away by someone he had never met and driven days to a place that was very different than any place he'd ever been and away from his mom and dad, it must have been really, really confusing. And he never really talked about it. I know he had a very close relationship with his grandfather. He really adored his grandfather. And unfortunately, I never met my great-grandfather. He passed away the same month I was born, which must have also been really hard as a transition time for my father. He was 21 years old, welcoming his first child, and his father figure was gone from his life all in the same month. So, not surprisingly, all of that kind of left a mark on my dad. He did his best. I think he had undiagnosed dyslexia, but he was very good visuospatially and mechanically inclined. And he graduated high school as the Vietnam War was going on and took a job as an apprentice at the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard, which is on the border between New Hampshire and Maine, because that was a way for him to no longer be someone who would be drafted to the Vietnam War. He kept that job his entire life and retired from the job 2000. So he worked there over 30 years. I never knew him to skip a day of work. He was an extremely hardworking man. He taught me a lot about work ethic and the importance of being committed to things, even if you don't like what goes on there every day. Because he certainly didn't define himself by his work, but he was proud of what he did. Now, aside from that, though, he did develop a problem with drinking. And when he and my mom divorced in 1995, he stayed sober for about a year, and then he began drinking quite heavily. And by the time he retired from his job in 2010, he had developed ascites, which was a physical symptom and manifestation of his cirrhosis and liver disease. And he had begun to start to have problems with his thinking. This is fairly common in people who have end-stage alcoholic cirrhosis. Their ability to think rationally about things sort of fades. They can become agitated and paranoid. And this happened to my father. At the time, he was living with his mother, and she was elderly, living in an in-law apartment. And he was angry at her about something and nailed her into the apartment using 2x4s, which resulted in adult protective services coming, investigating, finding that he had been abusive towards her. But it turns out that that doesn't really do anything, because by then my sister had removed my grandmother from her home and she was safe. She actually then came to live with me and my husband in California. And then this started a long feud between them. My grandmother then filed a lawsuit with the state of New Hampshire to try to get my father removed as the trustee of her trust. He had been named in the 1980s as the trustee of the irrevocable trust that held her home and her land. And he refused to step down from that job, that appointment. So she was suing him and he was suing her. And my sister and I were just trying to stay out of it, but my father wasn't talking to us for the months between October 2011 and April 2012, when my grandmother passed away. And at that point in time, he then turned and sued me and my sister because my grandmother had left some money, not a huge amount of money. She had been a lunch lady. She died at age 87. She had spent most of what she had, but she left some cash in her retirement accounts to me and my sister with the hope that we would keep my father housed in the house that she owned and pay for the taxes and anything that he needed during his lifetime. But he didn't want to stay there. So he, unbeknownst to us, sold the house that she owned because he was the trustee. He owned it then. He sued me and my sister, his only two children, and we ended up in mediation. And the last conversation I had with him was November of 2012, 2 months after my son, his first grandchild, was born. And my son is named after his two grandfathers. So my father's name is Vincent. My husband's father was Alan. He had died the prior year, also of alcoholic complications. And my son is named Calvin. So my husband and I, we both really love and admire our fathers. We're sorry that they had the problems that they did with alcohol, but we also experienced a lot of pain based on the choices that they made during their lifetimes. So during that conversation, November 2012, my baby was crying in the background. My father was trying to tell me the reasons he had why I should give him the bit of money that my grandmother had left to me and my sister. And I interrupted him and said, "I'm sorry, Dad, but I know you can hear my baby in the background. I know you heard that I was pregnant because I couldn't come in person for the mediation. Do you want to know anything about your grandson?" And his response was no. And I still feel that in my body. God, it was just gutting. So I choked up, as I'm choking up now. And I told him, "Okay, well, I don't think I can really talk to you anymore right now, so I'm going to hang up." And I hung up the phone. And I didn't think that would be the last conversation I had with my dad. But we didn't talk again. So the following April, which was the anniversary of his mom's death, I and my sister, we both reached out to him via email because we were too afraid to call him on the phone. And we were trying to mend the fence, say, "Hey, we miss you. We're thinking of you. This is the anniversary of your mom's death. We know we all loved her. We love you. And we hope that, we can connect." And his response to me was telling me to burn in hell. So I kind of learned a lesson. He had told me he didn't want to know anything about my son, his grandson. He had told me to burn in hell. And so I just kind of stayed out of his way. And it wasn't hard because he didn't reach out to me and we didn't talk for many, many years. So let's fast forward to December 2023. My husband and I attended an event called Date with Destiny. It is a 6 or 7 day event that's put on by Tony Robbins that's supposed to be all about helping you really align your values with what you do with your life and your purpose. And everybody who has attended this event has told me it's just incredible and amazing. So I was really excited and looking forward to it, but I didn't know what to expect. And like all the other Tony Robbins events I've been to, the days were long. So we started, I think, at about 9 or 10 a.m. And the first day finished at about 2 or 3 in the morning. And what we did that first day was a Hawaiian blessing called Ho'oponopono. And during this blessing, Tony had, the 2,000 people in the room saying the following over and over, literally for probably over an hour. And the blessing is, "I love you. I'm sorry. Please forgive me. Thank you. I love you. I'm sorry. Please forgive me. Thank you." I said those words over and over, thinking about my dad. And Tears poured down my face, and I just felt so much love for him and so sorry. And I wasn't angry with him. I wasn't scared of him anymore. I just really knew that I was going to connect with him again. And I felt really good about it. So we left that big, huge convention center in Fort Lauderdale, Florida at 3 in the morning. And we're walking back to our hotel room. And I told my husband, I'm going to call my dad in the morning. And he was like, okay, good luck. A little nervous about it, understandably. And even though I had been up till 3 a.m., I woke up at like 7 or 8 a.m. and I went on my phone and I started Googling and I wrote down some phone numbers and I called. And the first number went to, the the number you are trying to reach is no longer in service kind of automated message. The second number got answered by a woman whose voice I didn't recognize, and she didn't know my dad. She didn't recognize his name. So I assume it was a number he had maybe had at one point in time, but had been repurposed. And I tried one more number that again just didn't connect. And then we went to the second day event. And at the second day of the event, we were led through a blessing. And again, I didn't know what this was, but Tony's wife, Sage, sang, and it was like a guided meditation. They had us visualizing the colors of different chakras in our body. And then we were doing something in a slightly different format, but something familiar to me because Tony Robbins has this exercise called priming, which I've done many times. And it's a beautiful exercise where he guides you through visualizing times in your life where wonderful things have happened and just really remembering and being there with all your senses, the beautiful, wonderful thing you had, how you felt, who was with you. It's great to do that. So this time, though, in the blessing, it was like that on fast forward. Like these memories were just flooding into my brain. I was 4 years old. It wasn't just a memory. It was as if I were 4 years old in my 4-year-old body, wearing my blue gingham dress, standing on the dining room chair at my birthday party. And my mom was pregnant with my sister to my left, and my dad was on my right in the corner. My 2 grandparents were there. My aunts and uncles were there. And I just felt so loved. Now, I was the oldest grandchild on both sides of my family. I was an incredibly adored child. And man, it was amazing to be back in that memory and to feel that adoration and love and those eyes on me and just to see all the people in my life who I love there again. It was beautiful. And then in the next moment, I was again in my body at a different time at the foot of my grandmother's bed in April 2012 as she's dying in the hospital here in Santa Monica. And it was again the exact scene. I was at her feet. I was kissing her knee. My husband had his hands on my shoulders. My sister was to my left, holding my grandmother's hand. And at that moment, her soul, this is going to sound crazy. I realize this is going to sound crazy, but at that moment, her soul left her body and my soul joined her. And I was no longer in my body. So I started to have this out of body experience. And I don't know how to explain this, but I'll just do my best to explain what it was like for me. So I suddenly was nowhere. It was like vibrating with energy. It was completely dark, but also completely light. It was incredibly beautiful. I was aware that I was both sobbing and laughing, but I wasn't in my body anymore. I was communicating with my grandmother. I knew it was her who brought me to this place. And she was right there with me, but she wasn't something. It wasn't like a ghost. It wasn't a form of her. I wasn't seeing her there. And then in that moment, my cousin, who had died in October, a couple months before, at the age of 40, of a massive heart attack, his presence was there. And he communicated again without words, but just, it was basically like, hey, cuz. And so it was this idea that I was with them in this place beyond life that was so beautiful. We were all one. There was no friction. There was nothing to say. It just was incredible. And then I kind of asked without asking, like, oh, but what about my husband? What about my children? And then I could see them as if they were far away, kind of glowing as if I was there with them, but not there with them. But I knew they were fine. And that put me at peace. At the same time, I began to be aware that my physical body was experiencing a pretty intense headache. And I started thinking, oh, maybe I should go back. But no, I I don't want to go back. Like, this is great. This is incredible. I want to stay here. And then at some point, I did come back to my body. And at some point, I was prompted to stand up, and I stood up. My eyes were still closed. And then I put my hands on my eyes, and I don't know how long I stood there. Time had kind of shifted. It wasn't like it usually is. And then when I took my hands off my eyes, they were soaked as if someone had poured a bottle of water on them. And I'm not really a crier, but like the tears that were pouring out of me were just copious. And then I opened my eyes and the lights were on, and everyone had pretty intense experiences. I don't think everyone had as intense an experience as I had had. They began passing around some papers asking kind of like, what was that like for you? And how would you rate it as an experience from 1 to 10? And do you have any comments? Well, of course, I didn't really. I almost felt I've never had a seizure, but as a doctor, I've seen patients in what's called a post-ictal state where they're kind of pretty out of it after a seizure. And I almost felt like I was in a post-ictal state. Like I couldn't really form words. I was able to read the paper and kind of make sense of it. I was able to write on there, that was pretty crazy. And they asked, what happened? I was like, I think I died, question mark. And then they asked me to rate it 1 to 10. And I circled a 10 because I guess that's kind of cool. I've never done that before, had an out of body experience. And then I wrote at the bottom because it was like, is there anything else you'd like us to know? And I think I wrote, what the F just happened? Because I was really just so confused. And then we got into groups, we talked with each other. A common theme was that people had experiences where they connected with people either from a distant point in their past, as if it were happening now, or they connected with people who had died, but were able to communicate with them in some way. And so the whole experience was trippy. It was weird. When I told my sister, she's like, yeah, are you sure they didn't put drugs in your snacks or something? And no, I'm not sure, except I was fine afterwards. And not everyone had this experience, but it was a very incredible, deeply spiritual experience. And I'm not a religious or spiritual person. Before this event, I would have said, like, I don't really know what happens to us after we die. But what I felt after having that experience, the number one thing was I'm no longer afraid to die. It was so beautiful. I wanted to stay there. And although coming back to my body and coming back to life was comfortable and reassuring, because it also was rather scary and gave me an intense headache, probably because I was hypertensive, but it was still so beautiful. So that was all on December 2nd, because the event had started on the 1st. And we continued to do the event. I continued to try to reach my dad a couple more times. No luck. But these days were still really long. We did a lot of intensive work. I left there with my new core values, feeling like a new woman. It was such a great experience. We flew back on Thursday night and came home to our children. This was the longest we'd ever been away from our kids, who at the time were 7 and 11. And they were missing us a lot, and we were missing them a lot. So we just loved on them. And the day we came home, my daughter hadn't gone to school because she had a migraine and had thrown up. She was probably stressed from our absence. And then the day after, my son didn't want to go to school, and we let him stay home so we could spend time with him. But I drove my daughter to school on Friday, the 6th of December. And again, I dropped her off, and I'm driving back in LA traffic. And LA traffic is horrendous. There's long stoplights. So I'm at this long stoplight, and I was just like, you know what? There is no reason I shouldn't be able to reach my dad. Damn it. Like in this day and age with Google, there's got to be a way. So I searched his name again, and I scroll. And this time I found a 603 phone number, which is the area code for New Hampshire. And I thought, oh, this is one I haven't tried. It's got to be him. And I called, and again, it was the number you are trying to reach has been disconnected. And I thought, oh, dang it. And then I scrolled down more, and I saw his obituary. And my father had passed away on December 2nd, on the day, well, that morning was the morning that I finished giving him the Ho'oponopono blessing, where I just sent out to the universe my love for him, my compassion and feeling sorry for him, my thanking him. And then the next day was when his mom took me into the cosmos and let me know everything's okay. And somehow, to me, this has been a really amazing personal experience. I've told other people, some people are like, oh, yeah, whatever. That's just a coincidence. But for me, I can't say it's a coincidence. I know that my dad was really medically ill years before he died. I don't know anything about his health or well being. Could he have gotten sober? He could have gotten sober, I suppose. And in that case, maybe he could have lived a long, long time. I don't know if he died of natural causes, of complications from his cirrhosis, or of something else. But I feel that there is a connectedness that we spiritual humans, actually, we're spiritual beings having a brief human experience. We're not just humans. I think that there are ways that we can connect with each other and love each other and forgive each other that we can barely even understand. And so my work as the parent doctor is fueled in large part by my desire to be a loving source of support for people like my grandmother. Like, she could have used a parent doctor in 1956 to help her know, like, how do you talk to a 3-year-old when you're going through a divorce? And should you endure the shame? Because at that time it was very shameful to be a single mother or a divorced mother and stay with your child. Or is it better if you travel, work in major cities, and send home all the money and let your parents raise your kid? And for my dad, he really could have used a parent doctor to help him know how to talk about all of his wounding and to be able to have a more open, emotionally connected relationship, not just with me as his child, but with everyone in his life. He was a fairly closed off person. I understand why. I'm not judging him for that at all. I love him with all my heart, but he could have used some help and some support. And sadly, he never got it. So, in my work as the parent doctor, it's my dream and my goal that I can help as many parents as possible sort of think through their own personal stories and their own families' stories. Because let's face it, well, what was I was going to say some bad word, but I guess I can say a bad word. It's a podcast. Shit rolls downhill, right? So, like, your family's trauma, your grandparents' trauma, your parents' trauma, like it ultimately keeps rolling until we decide we're going to stop it. And so I could be someone who tells myself the story that my dad didn't love me, that he was an alcoholic and a bad person who sued me, his child, and didn't talk to me for a decade. And I could be really overwhelmed by anger and sadness that he never got to meet his now 5 grandchildren. I mean, that man has populated the earth in a good way, but he didn't. And that was his choice. And I'm sorry for it, but there's nothing I can do to change it except to live my life going forward as a beacon of light, as an example that anyone can be forgiven, that it's never too late to make a change, to be more connected with your children. And I believe that with all my heart. So that was kind of a long story. I don't know how linear it was, but I wanted to share it today, especially because here in Los Angeles this week, we've had, as you probably have heard in the news, incredible, incredible losses. And because of this experience that I had a little over a year ago, I've been really working on my sense of who I really am, what my true self is, and understanding that it has nothing to do with wealth or stuff or material possessions. And although we're very fortunate that we had to evacuate for a day, we were worried. We have close friends who've lost their homes. The fires were very close to us. We live in Santa Monica, and the Pacific Palisades is just the next town north. So this was definitely a natural disaster that is the closest that it's ever come to me personally. And it definitely has the greatest impact on me of any natural disaster that I've ever heard about. But despite that, in viewing it, I also have the sense that what was lost for the most part, there were, of course, some lives lost, but considering the loss of homes and buildings, the life lost was pretty minimal. And I'm extremely thankful for that, because we can always rebuild the stuff and recreate the stuff. The only thing that really matters is our connection to one another. And at the end of the day, we are all connected. The energy that makes me me is the same energy that makes you you. and that makes your child, and my child, my child. It's all the same. For me, that is, I don't really call it God, but that is it. That's the thing, right? That's what it's all about. And I think the purpose in our life is to open ourselves as much as possible to seeing that with generosity and understanding that we are all the same, that we are all one, the world will become more like heaven. So that's it for today. I'm going to wrap up here. Sending my love to all of you and my best wishes for a very happy and healthy new year. I hope that I will see you in my book club. I'm now calling it the Book Summary Club because you don't have to read the books. And I think last year some people were confused. I had people telling me, I really want to join, but I just haven't had time to read the books. And I want to be clear, you don't have to read the books at all. So the first book this year is called What Do You Say? And it is again by Bill Stixrud, William Stixrud, and Ned Johnson. There, I got their names right. So Dr. Stixrud is a very experienced neuropsychologist who does academic testing and works with young people who've been diagnosed with ADHD, dyslexia, learning disorders, etc. And Ned Johnson is he's a tutor for test prep. So together they've seen quite a lot of people, quite a lot of children dealing with a lot of stressors. And the last book in 2024 was their book as well. And it's called The Self-Driven Child. If you missed that episode, you can find the replay in the Parent Doctor app. And if you're not yet a member of the book club, what are you waiting for? It's free. There's a lot of great people in there. We have a good conversation every month. And you can go to theparentdoctor.com/book club to sign up today. All right, everyone, take care. See ya.